What's going on, guys? It's the Unhinged Engineer here, and today I want to talk about a technique I've used previously to prepare for engineering interviews that has been successful so far. So I think, there's a lot of buzz about not only AI, but also how AI is affecting the interview processes at different tech and engineering companies. And I think I've found a way to kind of maximize the efficacy of AI tools during our interview prep, while also making sure we don't seem like AI slot machines in the interview. This is not an attempt to try to get past interviews or look like we know things that we don't by using AI tools. Rather, it's a way to use AI tools to actually ensure we crush the interviews, really drive home the fact that we know most of what is required of the role, and the few things that we don't know, we've prepared for and we're willing to take up were we to get the job. I just want to talk about how I've used AI tools in previous interviews of mine. I'm going to be referring to this as Claude, but this could obviously be done with other models like ChatGPT and Gemini. I hope you enjoyed today's video and get some value from it. If you're interested in professional development content like this for engineers, aerospace like I am, or otherwise, then this is definitely the channel for you. Let's get right into how I use Claude to prepare for engineering interviews. Okay, so there's gonna be three main sections of this video. The first one is just gonna be straightforward. What's the main idea I'm trying to get across to you? What is my main philosophy around using AI tools for engineering interview prep? Once we've laid that out, then I'll actually talk about the specific steps I've used in interviews previously with success. And then lastly, I'll talk about just like an example. I'm gonna take a job board off LinkedIn, walking through those steps I just described to you. So let's start off with the main idea. My main idea here is that we don't wanna use Claude to teach us, right? We don't wanna use Claude to teach us things we don't know and need to know for this job. That's just a great way to kind of become a slot machine. And these days, people can really see right through that. They can discern actual first principles understanding and effort from just, I sat and talked to an AI model for an hour beforehand and I'm regurgitating to you like an idiot. Like, people have gotten pretty good these days at detecting that kind of stuff. Maybe previously people skirted by, but I think by now AI is ubiquitous enough that people can tell when they're being BS'd and when they're not. So the goal here is not to just learn from Claude, because for many reasons beyond the scope of this video, learning straight from Claude, especially complicated engineering concepts, is not the best approach. Rather, we want to use Claude as an accelerant for self-study. So if there is a job we're going for and there's things that either we know in concept but really want to refine our understanding and refine delivery of that understanding of, or things we don't actually know and want to study in preparation for an interview, we want to do that the right way. Like, we want to really learn it, really internalize that information so that we are convincing and saying, hey, I could execute on these skills in the actual job. So the study process is real and is genuine. We're just using Claude to accelerate that process so we can do it more quickly. Obviously, interview time horizons are not infinite, and a lot of us have jobs if we're lucky while we're interviewing. So, we want to make the most of our time, and we're just using Claude to maximize the bang for buck, really pour gasoline on that fire. So I just have kind of a few do's and don'ts that illustrate the point I'm trying to get at, right? Do use Claude to lay out a study plan. These AI models are pretty good at generalizing and looking at fields as a whole based on the data on which they're trained, but don't ask it to like immediately jump right into an interview and start asking you stuff without any context, or without, honestly, it's not having any context, it's having too much context, right? Because it can't be specific to the role or to the scenario that you're trying to prepare for. That's how you start to seem like a slot machine. Next one is like using Claude to summarize primary sources. While we really do want to go directly to the source of this info, qualified lecturers, qualified textbooks, these sources are big. And so if we can condense them down in some meaningful way, AI models are great for that. But don't just take that at face value. Like, you really want to peek beyond the curtain and make sure you're just using Claude to interface with the primary source itself, rather than just being spoon-fed these concepts. And that kind of leads to the second bullet, right? We want this to be a back and forth. We kind of want to have a study buddy for looking at these textbooks or whatever dense, difficult to parse source we're actually pulling from, not just be spoon-fed answers. And then the last one, again, is kind of like all about downscoping what we're being prepared for, rather than just a general like, oh, this is what a GNC engineer does. Here you go. You're kind of playing to the median there, and that's not a great way to get hired. We want to be exceptional. And exceptionality requires that deep first principles understanding that we're going for. So again, to reiterate, we actually want to learn the concepts we're preparing for here. We don't want to just look like a facsimile of understanding, which for the most part is what these models actually are. So if you're just going to these AI models to be spoon-fed the material, even if you do get good enough at regurgitating it, it's not going to seem like genuine understanding, because for the engineer on the other end, it's going to feel like what discussing things with Claude or other AI models is actually like on the job. And I think we can all agree, while these models are great and really prolific in terms of spitting out content, actual understanding can be limited at times. So we want to speed up natural learning, not just regurgitate AI slop. So now let's talk about how we're going to actually do that. Starting off with this study plan that I referred to. What I would advise doing, and I mean this quite literally, is take the entire job rec, the entire job posting that you find and that you're applying to, and dump it into your AI model, and then ask it to broadly categorize different technical concepts, right? So looking at this role, which a lot of times these roles themselves are actually kind of regurgitated, right? So a hiring manager goes to a recruiter, and then without actual understanding of how these different things interface with one another, the recruiter then barfs it onto the internet. And so these job recs can get very, very lengthy very quickly. And so dump it all into Claude and say, okay, what are the commonalities between these different concepts and how can we bucket them effectively? Just an optional point here, depending on the kind of interview that you're doing, you may want to ask Claude to link the buckets it comes up with to your resume. So saying, hey, I've got this job rec with a bunch of stuff, let's condense it down to principal components, do the same thing for my resume, and then cross-reference those two lists to really see the intersections of what I've done previously with what they're looking for. That kind of depends on what type of interview you're doing. If it's a pretty academic one where they're just asking you to like whiteboard stuff or come up with other things, maybe you don't want to lump your resume in there because then you'll bias it towards stuff you actually know, when in reality you may want to focus on stuff you don't. But if it's something that's geared towards your experience specifically and you're going to be expected to speak to that experience, then you should actually cross-reference it with your resume. That's going to be really effective. Once you have these categories, rank them, right? I think you can take two approaches here. Either rank them based on what you know best, or rank them based on what you know worst, just kind of depending on how you feel going into the interview, among other things, right? If you're super, super confident and you really just want to go in there guns blazing and speak to the awesome experience you have that you feel is super relevant to the role, then maybe just hit the things that you're best at first so you can really, really crush delivery on them. But if it's a wide net that this rec has cast and you're not confident in certain things, like you're more confident in some sub areas and less confident in others, and you're scared about actually getting sucked into a rabbit hole about something you don't know, then maybe start with what you're worst at. I tend to like to start with what I'm worst at, just so that once I've covered my bases, I can speak at least somewhat to the things that I'm less familiar with and link it to things I am familiar with well enough to kind of stay afloat in the interview. Then once I have that confidence, I move on to really refining the stuff I can kill at. So it's just up to you and your temperament. Either way, rank them some way just so you know what order to do them in. And then once you have that, compile a bunch of different sources that are related to these different categories. We're not asking Claude to just teach us. Teach me how to be a modern sim engineer. Teach me how to be a GNC engineer, right? We don't want to do that. We want to go to what we did back in the Stone Age in college, where you open up a textbook or you read papers or you watch a lecture series. You actually want to go to the primary sources that you would be expected to reference on the job, because again, assuming this is a technically complex system you're working on, it's not going to be enough to just vibe the whole thing. If you vibe the whole thing and you're working on airliners, please let me know so I don't fly on your airline. So we really want to go straight to the source of this technical information so we can actually understand it at a deep level. Next step here is diving deep on those concepts we just talked about. Once you have your primary sources and the categories you want to prepare, go through them in the order you laid out at the beginning and use Claude to kind of accelerate this process in the following ways. Like I talked about, distilling these sources down to their main points. You actually know where to go to look in specific parts of the text or whatever. That's going to be the most ROI in terms of prepping for the actual job. Beyond that, if you ever get stuck on something, it can often be helpful to have something or someone to talk to. So just kind of going to Claude and being like, hey, I read through this thing. I understood everything except this sentence. Can you expand on it for me? Help me understand. And that could either be providing more context that the textbook kind of assumes you have and glosses over, or it can actually just be a matter of rewording it in a way that you happen to understand. And then the last one here is walking through specific examples related to what you're studying. So, okay, I understand this concept. I've got a full grasp of it. Can you provide me an example in the real world of how this actually would work, or at least how it would actually matter? Again, be careful to not go down the rabbit hole too deep, because the closer you get to reality, the further you get away from the very abstract understanding of things that Claude actually has. But just for actually linking, abstract concepts to specific examples, historical or otherwise, is good. Like, that's something that Claude can do reasonably well. As you're doing this, please, please, please take lots of notes. If you do not take notes, none of the stuff I'm describing will work, because you will just be sitting there, like, quite literally doom scrolling your chat with an AI model and not actually parsing any of the information. However you want to take notes, however you took notes in college, by all means, they're all fair game, but make sure you are taking notes yourself. You are documenting the core concepts and framing them in a way that you can understand and you can reference later. Not only is this the best way to actually retain and understand the information, we're also going to be literally using these notes in the next step. So definitely take notes. If there's one thing I can say about using AI models to prep for interviews, it's actually take your damn notes yourself, so that you're not just being spoon-fed. Because if you're just being spoon-fed, you're either not going to retain anything, or you're going to retain slop, and it's going to come through in the interview. You're not going to get the job. Take lots of notes. So we've gone through all our study subjects. We've taken a bunch of notes. We've got this lexicon of things that we're ready to speak to. What's the last step here? Well, the last step is actually practicing. Once you have all your notes compiled, feed them into your model along with the original rec. Like, if you have some kind of project where you can link different chats, this is a good time to do that. Link the different chats with your notes and with the actual job rec together, and come up with a bank of mock interview questions that you can use to prepare. At that point, you've got a really strong bank of resources you can use to prepare, and you can prepare with them in one of two ways. The first way is treating it like a written exam. I know that interviews are verbal for the most part, but I actually would recommend using it like a written exam if you're more confident in your ability to deliver, like, verbally, than you are in your technical understanding of the concept. So if it's something that's really, really simple and you're just worried about actually being able to speak to it verbally, then don't do this, do it in a verbal way. But if it's something that's complicated and your social skills are pretty good, like you're able to kind of have a back and forth with the interviewer that's approachable, but you want to make sure you really understand the technical concept, then flesh it out a little bit more in text. I think that's actually really helpful, and I've done that myself before. Or you can use it as a question bank for an oral interview. So if you want to actually go through the process of delivering these by mouth, you can ask a friend to go through these questions with you, or even an AI model itself, right? I haven't tried these voice bot tools that these different models have much, so I can't speak to their quality. I think I do know people who have done this kind of thing before, and they've spoken well of it. But even just going through it with a friend, like, this friend or family member doesn't actually need to understand the questions they're asking you, because you can just provide them with the notes and you can kind of jot down, like, hey, this is roughly what the answer should talk about. Okay, make sure I mention this, or make sure I don't mention that. You can kind of seed them with good information so that even if they're not a subject matter expert, they can help you in a meaningful way here. And then once that's done, just repeat yourself. Do it a bunch of times, like practice a bunch of times, get those reps in, and then the day of, you'll be able to do it like it's another day at the office. So I want to run through an example here that will hopefully be of use to all of you. Let's pretend, just for argument's sake, we're trying to work on the Orion capsule that recently was involved in the Artemis 2 mission. We're trying to work on the Orion capsule. We're going for a senior GNC position there. I picked a senior one just so that there's a bunch of text that we can use. Obviously, you'd want to use a position that you're actually applying to, right? So I just picked a random position off LinkedIn that came up on my feed, and yeah, pretend we're trying to get this job and we're preparing for it, and there's a lot of things here. Some things we know, some things we don't, and we want to make sure that we get good coverage over that space so that we can deliver on interview day. So let's jump into how I'd actually use Claude here. I've got this GNC job rec, and I'm going to feed it into Claude with a prompt. Like, this is just something I've used previously. It's like, today I'm starting to prep for an interview. I'm very excited about the interview's verbal. Like, in my past experiences, it's been more related to my actual resume rather than kind of whiteboarding stuff. But if it's more of an academic thing, then you could spell that out here. And then I would say, hey, when you look at this role, what are the broad categories of things I should study to prepare for the day? And then it will give you an output of a bunch of different things that you should look at. I have a very truncated version of that output here, just with like one-liners to fit it on the page, but you'll see shortly, like, there's a ton of stuff that you could use. So we're gonna do this, and we're gonna get out like these different study areas, and once we have them, we're gonna rank them in priority based on what we're more comfortable in and what we think is gonna matter the most day of. So iterate on this study plan with Claude. It's kind of cut off on my face here, but you can see, like, there's a ton of different stuff, a ton of bullets, and then sub-bullets, as these AI models love to do. But really look at the different bullets that it spits out and say, hey, in my experience or talking to the recruiter, I don't think this stuff is relevant, or I'm really, really excited to talk about this, so let's flesh that out into multiple categories. Like, iterate on the study plan. Maybe also you look at the job rec and you're like, okay, based on my understanding of this company, they say they want this, but it doesn't actually seem that important. Or, they say they want this and I'm really good at it already, so I don't need to prep for it. Just iterate on this plan. Don't take it at first value, and make sure you really have something strong, because this is going to lay the foundation of the rest of your study process. So we get this list out and then compile a ton of different primary sources that you want to use to study. So I just have here like a bunch of different books that I've seen and or read throughout my career related to satellite navigation. I also have a couple of YouTube series that I've watched myself, either in college or in previous job interview preparation sprints. But yeah, just find a bunch of sources that you think are going to be useful to you and get them ready, because now we're going to go through all of these different topics and we're going to study a bunch. We're going to take a bunch of really good handwritten notes that we can then reference later. Now we're going to compile these notes, feed them back into Claude. So these are not notes from any job interview I've done. I dug these up from college. But my point is, whether it's on an iPad or it's on paper, like, write out a bunch of notes and feed them back into Claude. So at that point, your notes should not only be a distillation of all the primary sources into what actually matters with accelerant from Claude, but all of these things written out in a way that you find intuitive because you wrote them, right? That's kind of the point here. So we're going to take these and we're going to feed them back into Claude along with the job rec again, to then correlate what we've done with different parts of the rec and ultimately make that question bank I referred to earlier. So again, we are trying to ground these AI models in the context of the specific thing that we're preparing for. Because if we don't do that, we're just gonna get a bunch of general stuff that plays in the middle, and that's not gonna sound like a deep understanding that's gonna get us the job. So we're grounding all of our notes and all of the outputs of our hard work studying, and we're gonna use it to make a question bank. As you can see on the right here, I've got a bunch of different questions sectioned out based on those categories that we came up with, and broke our notes out into. Come up with a bunch of different questions. I did violate the cardinal rule that I mentioned in the beginning, like, all these questions are from scratch, because obviously I'm not interviewing for this job and I didn't go and make a bunch of handwritten notes. But in reality, you would actually take your notes that you made and you dump them in. So if these questions do seem a little bit general, which looking at them, they kind of do seem general, that's because I haven't actually seeded them with my specific notes. So make sure you do that so you get really deep questions that get right to the first principles of what you're being assessed on, and then you can speak to them and use them to prepare in however way you'd want, whether that's verbal or it's written. At that point, you have really done a full loop of preparing for an interview using an AI model. So again, to reiterate, the first thing I said in the beginning, we are not using AI models to skirt past interviews or to look like we understand things we actually don't. I just think that's a bad idea for so many reasons. It could be its own video in and of itself. But we can use these tools as one of the most powerful learning levers that we have access to, just as much as the internet was back in the day. So this is just my method that I've only used a few times, so it's not backed by any data, but my method of actually using AI models. Claude is my choice, but you can do this with others, to make sure I get a good understanding of what's going to be asked of me on the day of my interview. So hopefully you can walk into there with some confidence, not just confidence, but also strong technical understanding, and then you can kill the interview and get that dream job you're looking for. So if you're interested in content that will help you get that dream job you're looking for, then this is definitely the channel for you. I'm the Unhinged Engineer. I make professional development content for other engineers like myself. So if that's something you're interested in, like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you next time.